The moment Ritsu pushed me forward, I already understood what he wanted. His small hands pressed against my back with the same eagerness I remembered from my previous life. But this time, instead of rushing toward the wealthy alpha family himself, he hid behind me and spoke in a trembling, innocent voice. "Brother, you should go with them. A family like Kuro's is too good for me. I want you to have this chance." To everyone else, he sounded like a sweet younger twin sacrificing his future for his older brother. To me, he sounded like a liar who had finally learned how to smile while handing someone a knife. I was 7 years old again. The thin cotton shirt on my body scratched against my skin, the orphanage hall smelled of disinfectant and rain, and beside the director stood the family that had changed Ritsu's life in our previous timeline. Kuro's clan. Even children knew that name. They were the oldest alpha family in the country, owners of Kuro's Biotech, the company that produced most of the legal suppressants and pheromone stabilizers used by registered omegas. Publicly, they were protectors of rare omegas. Privately, people whispered that their heir was a cruel alpha who could look at an omega in distress without blinking. That heir stood behind his parents now, dressed in a black coat too formal for a boy of 11, his dark eyes calm, cold, and unreadable. Akihiro Kuro's. Ritsu had once called him his cruel lover. In truth, Akihiro had never been his lover at all. In the previous life, Ritsu had run to the Kuro's family before I could move, tilting his face up with the prettiest smile and begging them to take him home. He had dreamed of becoming the beloved omega of the Kuro's heir, imagined himself standing beside Akihiro in silk and jewels while every alpha in the city envied him. Yet Akihiro never responded to him. Not to his smiles, not to his tears, not to the sweet pheromone he deliberately released when he reached adolescence. Akihiro suffered from pheromone emotional suppression, a rare disorder that made him almost unable to sense omega pheromones, and even without that illness, he was not a man who could be manipulated by someone's need to be adored. Ritsu hated him for it. He hated the Kuro's household for refusing to treat him like a little prince. He hated their rules, their quiet discipline, their way of giving protection without flattery. Years later, after he forged signs of soul resonance to force Akihiro into a bond, Akihiro personally exposed him and drove him out. From that day on, Ritsu told everyone that the Kuro's heir was heartless, that the alpha who should have loved him had ruined him instead. He never admitted that Akihiro had only refused a lie. As for me, I had not gone with Kuro's in that life. I was left behind until another organization came, a beautiful place called Aurelia Institute, where Omega children were promised education, medicine, and refinement. Behind its marble walls, they measured my pheromone output like livestock weight, drew blood until my arms turned purple, locked me in white rooms whenever my scent destabilized, and called it training. I survived because I learned faster than they expected. I grew up inside their cage, studied every drug they used on me, and eventually became the youngest researcher invited to a national pheromone conference. That was where Akihiro found me again, not as Ritsu's rejected alpha, but as the only person in the hall whose scent made his frozen expression crack. "White camellia," he had said then, voice almost disbelieving. That was the first time I saw warmth in his eyes, but I would not call it that now. It was not the first time that mattered. It was the moment an alpha who had lived like winter finally realized there was something in the world he still wanted to protect. We loved each other too late. Before we could complete our permanent bond, before he could place his mark on me with consent and vows instead of instinct, Ritsu drove a car into me under the snow. The last thing I remembered was Akihiro's voice breaking as he held me, his pheromone burning around us like a storm no suppressant could tame. Then I opened my eyes in the orphanage again. And Ritsu opened his too. He thought I did not notice. He thought the fear that flashed across his face was hidden quickly enough. But I knew my twin better than anyone. I had spent 2 lives watching jealousy rot him from the inside, turning every kindness into insult and every blessing into something he had been robbed of. He believed the Kuro's family was a punishment. He believed Akihiro was a cruel alpha who would make me suffer the way Ritsu claimed he had suffered. So he pushed me forward with that bright little smile, certain he had finally handed me his old misery while freeing himself to steal my future. "Mrs. Kuro's lowered herself slightly to meet my eyes. She was graceful, dressed in cream silk, her scent carefully blocked by a formal suppressant badge. "Your name is Ren Asakura, correct?" she asked. "Would you like to come with us?" Before I could answer, Ritsu leaned closer, his lips almost brushing my ear. "Go on, brother," he whispered. "Marry my cruel alpha when you grow up. Let's see how long you can keep smiling. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because fate had given him a second life, and he still understood nothing. He did not know what kind of family he had thrown away. He did not know what kind of alpha had stood beside my grave until revenge hollowed him out. He did not know that the man he called cruel had once kissed my bloody fingers and begged me to stay awake. So I smiled. I stepped toward Akihiro Kuro's and bowed with all the politeness a 7-year-old Omega could manage. I agree, I said, my voice small but steady. I will go with the Kuro's family. The hall became very quiet. Ritsu's eyes widened for half a second, not in regret, but in satisfaction. He thought I had accepted a death sentence. The orphanage director sighed in relief, probably touched by the sight of one twin accepting the other's sacrifice. Mr. Kuro's studied me with a sharp gaze, as if weighing whether I understood what adoption by their family meant. Mrs. Kuro's expression softened, but Akihiro did not look at any of them. He looked only at me. For a moment, the cold mask on his face loosened. It was subtle, barely there, a tremor in his lashes, a tightening of his fingers at his side. Then the air changed. I felt it before anyone spoke. The faint pressure of an alpha's pheromone slipping past strict control, not violent, not possessive, but shaken. It curled around me like dark cedar after rain, familiar enough to make my chest ache. He remembered. I knew it then, though he said nothing. Akihiro Kuro's had returned as well. Mrs. Kuro's turned toward her son, perhaps expecting his usual indifference. Akihiro. His gaze never left mine. Him, he said. The director blinked. Young master. I want Rana Sakura. His voice was calm, but I heard what no one else could hear beneath it. Restraint stretched to the edge of breaking. Ritsu heard none of that. He only saw the Kuro's heir choosing the Omega he had pushed away, and his smile stiffened before he forced it back into place. Poor Ritsu. Even in this life, he was already standing outside a door he had closed with his own hands. The adoption papers were signed quickly after that. Mr. Kuro's did not waste words. Mrs. Kuro's gently wrapped a scarf around my neck, murmuring that the rain had made the air too cold for a child dressed so thinly. I thanked her, and the word almost hurt because I had spent so many years without anyone doing something as simple as noticing I was cold. When I turned to leave, Ritsu stood near the director, his small face sweet and pitiful. Brother, he called, don't forget me. I looked back at him. He wanted guilt. He wanted fear. He wanted to see the beginning of my downfall reflected in my eyes. Instead, I gave him the same gentle smile he had used on me. Take care of yourself, Ritsu. His fingers curled into his sleeves. Akihiro walked beside me toward the black car, waiting outside the orphanage gate. The rain had slowed to mist, and the world looked pale beyond the windows, as if someone had washed the color out of the morning. I was too tired to keep my back straight. Rebirth had pulled old pain through a child's body, and the memories of blood, snow, and that final broken cry still clung to me. Before I could stumble, Akihiro's hand steadied my shoulder. He withdrew it almost at once, as if afraid he had touched too much, then opened the car door for me himself. Once I sat down, he removed his coat and placed it over my knees without asking. The fabric was warm from his body, carrying the clean, restrained scent of cedar and winter air. You don't have to be afraid, he said quietly. I looked at him. The boy beside me was not yet the man who would one day tear down an empire for my death, but his eyes already held the weight of both lives. I'm not afraid of you. His fingers tightened on the edge of his sleeve. The car began to move. Through the misted window, I saw Ritsu standing at the orphanage gate. He was smiling again, triumphant, convinced he had won. He thought I was being carried toward the same loneliness that had swallowed him. He thought Akihiro's silence meant cruelty, and the Kuro's name meant a cage. He never knew what he had truly lost. The motion of the car made my eyelids heavy. I tried to stay awake, but the warmth of Akihiro's coat, the steady rhythm of rain, and the quiet safety of his presence pulled me under. My head tilted before I could stop it, and I felt a hand gently guide me until I rested against his shoulder. He did not move away. In the soft darkness before sleep, I heard him whisper, so low it might have been meant only for the life we had lost. This time, run, I won't be late. The Kuro's estate was not a paradise, yet it was nothing like the prison Ritsu had described in our previous life. It was quiet, disciplined, almost severe in the way old alpha families often were, but there was no cruelty hidden beneath its silence. No one starved me for making mistakes. No one forced me to smile for strangers. No one praised me as a treasure while measuring how much my pheromone could be sold for. On my second night there, Mrs. Kuros placed a warm bowl of rice porridge in front of me, noticed I held the spoon with my left hand, and quietly moved the side dishes closer to that side. Such a small thing should not have made my throat tighten, but after the white rooms of Aurelia and the long cold tables where I had once been treated like an experiment, kindness could still feel more dangerous than pain. Akihiro did not become gentle all at once. He rarely smiled, rarely spoke unless necessary, and his eyes still carried the stillness that had made people call him heartless. Yet from the day I entered the Kuros household, his indifference seemed to stop at the door of my room. He remembered that I disliked bitter medicine and asked the kitchen to prepare honey water before every health check. He noticed that I could not sleep in total darkness, so a small lamp appeared beside my bed without anyone mentioning it. When tutors came to test my reading and arithmetic, he stood near the window pretending to read his own book, but whenever the questions became too difficult, he would tap the page once with his finger, pointing me toward the answer without embarrassing me in front of the adults. I was a child again, but my heart was not young enough to misunderstand everything. Akihiro remembered. He did not say it, and neither did I. We lived around that secret carefully, like two people walking beside a frozen lake, knowing one careless step could break the surface. In my last life, we had loved each other as adults. In this life, my body was still small, my scent not yet matured, and his alpha instincts had not fully awakened. The warmth between us had to grow in the right season, not be dragged out of old grief. Perhaps he understood that better than anyone, because no matter how much pain flickered in his eyes when he looked at me, he never crossed the line. Years passed in that careful distance. I learned the rules of the Kuros family and the world they guarded. Omega children with rare pheromones were registered under the Pheromone Association because too many organizations wanted to use them as tools, brides, or research material. Kuros Biotech made legal stabilizers and suppressants, and the clan used its influence to shelter those who could not protect themselves. In my previous life, Ritsu had called their rules suffocating. Now I understood why. The Kuros family gave love in the form of boundaries, and Ritsu had always mistaken boundaries for rejection. News of him reached us only in fragments. The family that adopted him at first treated him like a delicate jewel, but Ritsu had never wanted care, he wanted worship. He cried when corrected, smiled only when praised, and released his pheromone whenever adults refused him something. Eventually, whispers came that his adoptive parents had sent him to a private Omega academy for proper discipline. My hand froze around the teacup when I heard the name. Aurelia Institute. Akihiro noticed immediately. Run. I lowered my eyes. I'm fine. You're lying. His voice was blunt, almost cold, but his hand moved to the edge of the table, close enough for me to touch if I wished. He never forced comfort on me. He only placed it within reach. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. After a long moment, I set my fingers over his. His hand was larger now, warmer, the veins beneath his skin faintly visible as he clenched once before forcing himself to relax. Aurelia is not just an academy, I said quietly. I know. His answer was too fast. I looked up. Akihiro met my gaze, and for a moment the boy beside me vanished beneath the shadow of the man who had once burned an empire to ashes. I have been investigating them. So he had not been idle. While I was learning to live without fear, he had been sharpening himself in silence. My chest ached with gratitude and something deeper, something I refused to name yet. We were still young, and I would not let fate hurry what love deserved to choose freely. The choice became harder the year my secondary gender fully awakened. Omega maturity did not arrive gently for those with rare pheromones. It came like a fever inside the blood, a warning from the body before the first heat. The doctors had prepared medicine, Mrs. Kuros had filled my room with calming flowers, and Akihiro had arranged his school schedule to stay near the estate, though he claimed it was only because his father needed him for company matters. The first wave struck at dusk. I remember dropping the glass in my hand. It shattered across the floor, but I could barely hear it over the pulse roaring in my ears. Heat crawled up my spine, sharp and humiliating, and the scent of white camellia burst from me so strongly that every alpha guard outside the eastern wing had to be evacuated. I hated it. I hated how my body turned my fear into fragrance, how my pheromone called out when my mind wanted only silence. The door opened. Akihiro stepped in wearing a suppressant collar and black gloves, his face pale from the force of resisting my scent. Behind him, mister. Kuro's barked an order for everyone else to retreat, but Akihiro did not look away from me. I was curled on the carpet, fingers digging into my own arms hard enough to bruise. Don't come closer, I forced out. It's dangerous. He closed the door behind him. Not to you. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean. His pheromones slipped into the room, restrained but steady, dark cedar wrapped around winter rain. It did not crush mine. It held it, shaped it, gave my panicked body something solid to lean against. When he knelt in front of me, I saw sweat at his temple and strain in his jaw, but his hands were gentle as he wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. Breathe with me, he said. I can't. You can. Look at me, Ren. I tried. The room blurred. My body wanted the alpha in front of me with a desperation that made shame burn behind my eyes. I clutched his sleeve and hated the weak sound that broke from my throat. It hurts. I know. No, you don't. My voice cracked. You don't know what Aurelia did when I... His expression changed. Not anger at me, never that, but a controlled violence aimed at every ghost that had followed me back from the last life. He gathered me into his arms before I could finish, one hand braced against my back, the other pressing my face against his shoulder, so I could breathe through the storm. I know enough, he said, low and rough. And none of them will touch you again. The hours after that came in waves. Medicine helped, but not enough. My pheromone kept surging, and each time it did, Akihiro held me tighter, murmuring my name until I stopped shaking. I lost count of how many times I begged him to mark me. The words came from pain, from instinct, from the frightened Omega body that wanted any end to the burning. Every time, Akihiro refused. Not coldly. Not cruelly. With a tenderness that hurt more than surrender would have. Near dawn, when my fever spiked and the doctors warned that my glands could be damaged if the heat did not stabilize, Akihiro finally lowered his mouth to the back of my neck. His breath trembled against my skin. Temporary only, he whispered. Not a bond. Not while you're like this. I sobbed into his shirt, too exhausted to answer. His teeth pierced gently into the gland line, shallow enough to avoid a permanent mark, deep enough for alpha pheromone to anchor mine. The relief was immediate, spreading through me like rain over scorched earth. My body went slack in his arms, and the last thing I felt before sleep was his hand covering the bite, as if shielding even that small wound from the world. When I woke, morning light lay across the room. I was in bed, clean, dressed in soft clothes, with bandages at the back of my neck and Akihiro asleep in the chair beside me. His hand still held mine, fingers locked around me, as if letting go might return us to the snow where he had lost me once. He looked exhausted. Younger than usual. Less like the unreachable air of Kuro's. More like a boy who had spent the whole night fighting both instinct and memory to protect someone he loved. I should have pulled my hand away. Instead, I leaned forward and kissed his cheek. Akihiro's eyes opened immediately. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his ears turned red, though his face remained painfully composed. Was that gratitude? He asked. I smiled despite the soreness in my throat. Maybe. Then next time, say thank you with words. You don't like it? His gaze dropped to our joined hands before returning to my face. I didn't say that. The warmth in my chest was quiet, steady, and mine. Not heat. Not pheromone. Not the echo of a tragic love from another life. Mine. I finally understood what Ritsu had never seen. Akihiro Kuro's was not a cruel lover. He was an alpha who would rather suffer all night than steal a bond from an omega too weak to choose. That kind of restraint was not coldness. It was love wearing armor. Several months later, when winter returned, so did Ritsu. He appeared at the Kuro's gate thinner than I remembered, his once bright face sharpened by bitterness. The guards refused to let him in until he called my name loudly enough for the whole front courtyard to hear. Akihiro came out beside me, his coat immediately settling over my shoulders before the wind could touch me. Ritsu saw it. His eyes moved from the coat to Akihiro's hand resting lightly near my back, not touching, yet ready to steady me at any moment. Something ugly twisted across his face. So this is how it is, he said, voice shaking with laughter and hatred. You took the hell I gave you and turned it into heaven. I looked at my twin, and for a moment pity almost softened me. Almost. Akihiro stepped slightly in front of me, his voice calm enough to cut. Ren did not take anything from you. Ritsu's smile cracked. Behind him, a black car waited beyond the gate, its emblem half hidden beneath falling snow. I recognized the crest engraved on the door. Aurelia. And suddenly I knew peace would not last much longer. Ritz's return did not break the Kuro's estate immediately, but it left a crack in the silence that spread through the following years. He was not welcomed inside that day. Akihiro refused him with a calmness that made the guards lower their eyes, while I stood behind his shoulder and watched my twin's expression twist between hatred and humiliation. The Aurelia car waited for him beyond the gate like a shadow with polished doors. Before Ritza left, he looked at the coat on my shoulders and laughed softly. "Enjoy it while you can, brother. An alpha's kindness always has a price." I did not answer. I knew better than anyone what kindness with a price looked like, and Akihiro's hand, steady near my back without claiming me, was not that. By the time I entered university, the name Ren Asakura Kuros had already become familiar in the field of pheromone medicine. I chose biochemistry, not because destiny pushed me there, but because I refused to let Aurelia define what my body was worth. If my pheromone could calm unstable alphas, if my blood carried a compound rare enough for monsters to hunt me across 2 lives, then I would be the one to decide how it was used. I worked under Professor Mizuno, a severe beta researcher who cared more about results than family names, and within a year, our lab began developing a stabilizer that could help omegas survive heat without relying on an alpha's bite. Akihiro entered Kuro's biotech the same year. He claimed it was only an internship, yet half the board already straightened when he walked into a room. The cold boy from the orphanage had grown into a man whose silence could bend a meeting, but the old rumors followed him like winter fog. The cruel alpha. The Kuro's heir who rejected every omega. The man who had once driven his adopted omega out without mercy. People whispered because they only saw the blade and never the hand that held it back from those who did not deserve to bleed. With me, Akihiro remained almost unfairly careful. He never touched my gland without asking, never entered my room when my pheromone was unstable unless I called him, and never used the temporary bite between us as proof of ownership. Every evening, no matter how late my experiments ended, his car waited outside the research building. If I complained that Kuro's headquarters was nearly an hour away, he would glance at the documents in his hand and say, "I needed the drive." Once, after I fell asleep in the passenger seat, I woke to find we were still parked outside the lab, engine running softly, his coat covering me and his laptop open on his knees. He had stayed there for 3 hours because he did not want to wake me. "Akihiro," I murmured, still heavy with sleep, "you could have taken me home." He turned a page without looking up. "You were tired. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters." I should have teased him then, but my chest warmed too much for words. In my previous life, we had been rushed by grief, danger, and the cruel timing of death. This time, love arrived in smaller ways. A coat around my shoulders, a hand covering the corner of a table before I bumped into it, a cup of warm milk placed beside my notes at midnight, his scent thinning whenever he sensed my stress, so he would not pressure my omega instincts. Akihiro loved like a man afraid of becoming a cage, and that restraint made me want to walk toward him on my own. The soul resonance awakened during an ordinary afternoon. A glass tube cracked in my hand, cutting across my palm. The wound was shallow, but across the city, Akihiro interrupted a board presentation and pressed his own hand to his chest as if something had struck him. 20 minutes later, he appeared at the lab door, tie loosened, breath controlled too carefully. Professor Mizuno looked at him, then at my bandaged hand, and wisely decided not to ask why the Kuro's heir looked more shaken than the injured patient. "It was a small cut," I said. Akihiro took my wrist gently. "Your small cut felt like a knife between my ribs." We both went quiet. Temporary bite could not do that. A normal alpha-omega attraction could not reach across the city and carry pain through the blood. Soul resonance was supposed to be rare enough to belong in medical journals and old family records. A bond that formed before any mark, recognizing 2 people before their bodies had made a vow. In another story, that might have been romantic. To me, it was frightening. I did not want fate to take credit for what my heart had chosen with such care. That night, snow began falling earlier than expected. Akihiro found me on the empty bridge behind the research center, looking down at the river lights. He said nothing at first, only stood beside me and let the wind move between us. His self-control had always been immaculate, but I could feel the fear beneath it now. He was afraid I would think the resonance had trapped me. Afraid I would step back. Afraid that loving me too much would become another form of pressure. So I reached for his hand. His fingers stiffened. "Run!" I don't know what soul resonance wants, I said, watching snow melt on his sleeve. I don't know whether our bodies remembered before we did, or whether the universe is simply cruel enough to tie people together after killing them once. I turned to him, and the words came steadier than I expected. But I know what I want. I choose you, Akihiro. Not because of scent. Not because of the bite. Not because of what happened before. Because you waited until I could say it myself. The mask he wore in front of the world broke without sound. His eyes reddened at the edges, and for a breath he looked painfully young, like the boy in the car who had held still so I could sleep on his shoulder. I have loved you across 2 lives, he said. But I wanted this life to give you a choice. You did. Only then did he kiss me. It was not desperate at first. His lips touched mine with the same restraint that had saved me during my heat, careful enough to ask even without words. I answered by leaning closer, by gripping the front of his coat, by letting my white camellia rise until it wrapped around his cedar scent and made the air tremble. Akihiro's hand settled at my waist, firm but gentle, and when the kiss deepened, the resonance between us rang through my body like a vow spoken under the skin. After that night, he told me the truth. He remembered everything. My blood in the snow. Ritz's car. The way his own pheromone had gone mad enough to shatter windows when I stopped breathing. He remembered tearing Aurelia apart, following the trail to Kagami clan, and discovering too late that the fire that killed our parents had never been an accident. Kagami had wanted my parents' research, a method to protect Omegas from forced bonds, and when they refused, the clan erased them. Aurelia was not merely an academy, it was Kagami's hunting ground. I should have told you sooner, Akihiro said, voice rough. I sat beside him in his study, my hand still held between both of his. You were protecting me. I was afraid. That too. I squeezed his fingers. But I am not made of glass. His mouth curved faintly. No. You are much more dangerous than glass. For a while, we were happy in the reckless, quiet way people become happy while standing near the edge of war. Akihiro proposed 2 months later, not with a public announcement, but in the greenhouse behind the Kuro's estate, where white camellias bloomed under warm lights. The ring was simple, silver with a small carved flower inside the band where only I would see it. No permanent bond until you finish your research, he said, as if negotiating a contract while his hands trembled. No wedding until Aurelia is gone. No mark until you can stand in front of me without fear, duty, or danger forcing your answer. I laughed through tears. That sounds more like a warning than a proposal. It is a promise. Then yes. His breath caught, and this time I kissed him before he could ask whether I was sure. While Akihiro and I moved closer, Ritsu fell deeper into Aurelia's hands. Soma Kagami found him there, all polished manners and poisonous tenderness. He told Ritsu exactly what he wanted to hear. That Ren had stolen his place, that Akihiro's rejection had been cruelty, that a lesser Omega could still become priceless if he helped the right Alpha. Ritsu delivered him fragments of my research, old Kuro's schedules, security habits, anything that made him feel chosen. Yet one night, hiding behind a half-open laboratory door, he heard Soma laugh. Ritsu is only a defective mirror of Ren. Use him while he is obedient. Once we have White Camellia, send him to testing. That should have been enough to save him. Instead, shame hardened into something uglier. If he had been used, then I had to fall too, or the truth would be unbearable. The attack came the night before our engagement ceremony. I stayed late at the lab to secure the final data, ignoring Akihiro's third message, asking when I would come down. The hallway lights flickered once. Then the suppressant gas entered through the vents, bitter and metallic. My phone slipped from my hand as my knees struck the floor. When I woke briefly, I was being carried through the snow. Soma's voice drifted above me, smooth as a blade. Tell Kuro's his Omega is with Kagami now. Across the courtyard, through the blur of falling white, I saw Akihiro arrive too late. He picked up the scarf I had dropped, and the alpha pheromone that burst from him shook the glass doors behind him. His voice reached me just before darkness closed in. Run! When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me was white, seamless, and cruelly bright. For a moment, my body forgot which life I was in. The smell of disinfectant, metal restraints, and artificial suppressants dragged me back to Aurelia before thought could catch up, and my fingers curled so hard against the examination table that my nails scraped the surface. I was no longer the helpless Omega from my previous life, yet fear remembered old corridors better than courage did. Somewhere beyond the glass wall, Machines hummed with the steady patience of things built to hurt people quietly. Soma Kagami stood beside the monitor, dressed in a pale suit that made him look almost gentle. That was his gift. He wore elegance like a clean bandage over rot. When he saw me awake, he smiled as if we were meeting at a charity banquet instead of a hidden laboratory where Omega children had once disappeared into locked rooms and returned with empty eyes. "Rena Sakura," he said, brushing a gloved finger across the data screen. "White camellia pheromone. The only stabilizing compound strong enough to calm an alpha's gland collapse without full bonding. No wonder Kuro's guarded you like a national treasure." I pulled once against the restraints. The cuffs were lined with suppressant mesh, cold enough to numb the skin. "If you wanted a lecture, Professor Mizuno would have given you a better one." Soma laughed softly. "Still sharp. Good. I would hate to break a dull thing." Across the room, someone made a small sound. I turned my head and saw Ritsu standing near the storage cabinets, pale, thin, and trembling under an Aurelia-issued coat. His eyes avoided mine at first, but not because of guilt alone. Shame had finally found him, and it did not look as satisfying as I had imagined. It made him smaller. "So you brought him to watch?" I asked. Soma glanced at Ritsu with lazy amusement. "He brought himself. Your brother has always wanted to see whether you bleed like everyone else." Ritsu flinched, but he did not deny it. Soma moved closer, lowering his voice until it carried only to me. "Your parents were difficult people. Brilliant but sentimental. They created a method to protect Omegas from forced bond marks, then refused to sell it to Kagami. They believed knowledge should save people rather than control them." He smiled again. "Idealists usually die poor. Yours died in fire." My breath stopped. The old house. The smoke. The screams I had buried because surviving Aurelia had required more urgent pain. For years, Ritsu and I had believed the fire was an accident, then a tragedy, then a wound neither of us knew how to name. Now Soma spoke of it as a business decision. "You killed them," I said. "Kagami gave the order. I was too young to enjoy the details." He leaned over me, eyes bright with inherited cruelty. "But I will finish what they refused. With your pheromone, I can create a false bond serum. An alpha will control an omega without consent, without courtship, without risk. No more waiting for love, no more fragile vows. Just command and obedience." Ritsu's face turned ashen. At last, something in him cracked loudly enough to hear. "You said it was only research," he whispered. "You said Ren was the one who ruined my life. You said if I helped you, I would finally be chosen." Soma looked at him as one might look at a broken instrument. "You were chosen, Ritsu. For convenience." The word struck harder than any slap. Ritsu stared at him, and I saw the moment both lives collided inside him. The orphanage smile, the Kuro's gate, Akihiro's cold rejection, Aurelia's polished lies, Soma's poisoned tenderness. He had spent 2 lifetimes calling himself the victim of stolen love, yet every road had led him to the same truth. He had not been robbed. He had been hungry enough to follow anyone who promised to feed him. Soma signaled to the assistant near the machine. The table beneath me shifted, forcing my neck toward a gland extractor shaped like a silver claw. Panic tore through my pheromone, but the suppressant mesh swallowed most of it before it could reach the air. I thought of Akihiro, of his hand covering mine on quiet nights, of his voice under falling snow telling me he wanted this life to give me a choice. I held that memory like a blade. The extractor lowered. Then the lights went out. Not all of them. Just enough. The machine stalled, alarms began screaming, and the restraint on my left wrist clicked open. Ritsu stood beside the control panel with a stolen access card shaking in his hand. "Run," he said. Soma turned slowly. His expression did not change, which made it worse. "Ritsu." My brother backed away, tears spilling silently now. "I am tired of being useful to people who despise me." The next seconds moved too quickly. I freed my other hand, rolled from the table, and stumbled as the suppressant in my blood dragged at my knees. Soma lunged for me, but Ritsu shoved a tray of glass vials into his path. They shattered across the floor. A sharp chemical smell burst into the air, burning through the artificial suppressants. My white camellia pheromone finally rose, weak but alive, and somewhere far beyond the walls, I felt the answering thunder of cedar and winter rain. "Akihiro." The building shook minutes later. Not from the self-destruction system, not yet, but from the outer gates being breached. Kuro's clan did not arrive like saviors in stories. They arrived like judgment delivered in black coats, legal warrants, armed security, and enough evidence to crush every false wall Kagami had built. Through the broken intercom, Akihiro's voice cut through the alarms, colder than any rumor had ever made him. Seal every exit. No Omega leaves with Kagami personnel. Soma Kagami is mine. Soma's smile vanished. Ritsu helped me through the side corridor, half dragging me when my legs weakened. We passed rooms filled with files, storage tanks, and frightened Omegas pressing their hands against glass doors. I stopped at every lock I could reach. Ritsu cursed under his breath and helped me open them. Children, teenagers, adults with blank eyes and bruised glands staggered into the hallway, following the emergency lights toward the Kuro's rescue team flooding the lower wing. At the central chamber, Soma caught us. He had blood on his cheek from the shattered vials, but his hand was steady around a syringe filled with dark liquid. "Touching," he said. "The defective twin finally wants redemption." He aimed the needle at my neck. Ritsu moved before I could. The syringe struck his shoulder instead. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Ritsu gasped, knees buckling as black veins spread beneath his skin. I caught him before he fell, my hands shaking around his thin body. "Idiot," I choked out. "Why would you?" "Because I was wrong," he whispered, clutching my sleeve with desperate strength. "I kept saying you took everything from me, but I pushed it away. The family. The chance. Even him." His eyes moved past me, toward the corridor where Cedar Pheromone was drawing closer with terrifying speed. Akihiro was never cruel. He just never belonged to me. Soma stepped forward again. The wall behind him exploded inward. Akihiro entered through dust and broken glass, coat torn, eyes almost silver with alpha rage. Yet the moment he saw me holding Ritsu, his pheromone did not crush the room. He restrained it with brutal precision, making sure none of the rescued Omegas collapsed under the pressure. That was Akihiro. Even in fury, he protected before he destroyed. Soma drew a weapon from beneath his coat. Akihiro crossed the distance before the barrel fully rose. The fight was short, vicious, and nothing like the elegant duels noble alphas liked to stage. Soma fought like a man cornered by exposure. Akihiro fought like someone who had already lost the same person once and would not let history breathe again. The weapon clattered across the floor. Soma slammed into the console, and Akihiro pinned him there by the throat. "You wanted control," Akihiro said. "Now watch everything you built answer for what it did." Kuro's agents flooded the chamber, securing Soma, gathering evidence, carrying the injured. But Soma, even restrained, laughed through bloodied teeth and slammed his palm against the emergency trigger hidden beneath the console. Red lights erupted across the room. Self-destruction sequence initiated. The countdown began at 3 minutes. Akihiro turned toward me instantly. "Run, go. Not without you." He did not argue. He lifted Ritsu with one arm and caught my wrist with the other, guiding us through the collapsing corridor as heat roared behind us. We almost made it to the outer exit when the ceiling cracked. A support beam fell with a sound like thunder. Akihiro pushed me forward. The blast swallowed him. I hit the ground outside in snow and smoke. For one terrible second, the world went silent. Then I screamed his name and crawled back toward the rubble, ignoring every hand that tried to stop me. I found him beneath a fractured slab, blood dark against his white shirt, his cedar scent flickering like a candle in a storm. The soul resonance between us was fading, thread by thread, leaving a hollow coldness in my chest. "No," I whispered, pulling his head into my lap. "You promised you wouldn't be late." His eyes opened slightly. Even dying, he tried to smile. "I found you. That is not enough. Run." I bent down and kissed him before he could turn his last words into goodbye. The taste of blood and smoke broke something inside me, but beneath it was him, the alpha who had waited, restrained himself, loved without taking, and trusted me to choose. I touched the gland at the side of his neck with trembling fingers. His eyes sharpened. "Run, don't do this out of fear." "I'm not." My voice shook, but my heart did not. "I am choosing you. Fully. Finally. Mine." Then I bit him. At the same moment, with the last of his strength, Akihiro's teeth sank into the back of my neck, exactly where the temporary bite had once faded. Pain flashed white, then dissolved into warmth so vast it stole my breath. Our pheromones collided, not as hunger, not as survival, but as recognition. Cedar and white camellia. Winter rain and spring blossoms. 2 lives of grief closing around one vow. The soul bond formed. Akihiro's heartbeat slammed back through my chest as if it belonged to me too. He drew one ragged breath, then another. His hand rose slowly to the back of my head. "You are going to scold me later," he murmured. I broke into a sob that sounded too much like laughter. "For the rest of your life." "Good," he whispered. "Make it a long one." The aftermath did not feel like victory at first. It felt like hospital lights, witness statements, rescued Omegas wrapped in blankets, and Ritsu sleeping under antidote treatment with guards outside his room. But the truth could no longer be buried. Kagami clan's files exposed the murder of our parents, the creation of Aurelia, the forced experiments, the false bond serum, and the trafficking routes hidden under noble donations. Soma Kagami was sentenced to life imprisonment, stripped of rank, inheritance, and name. Aurelia Institute was dismantled stone by stone. Every Omega who had been registered as research property received legal protection under Kuro's sponsorship. Ritsu survived. He did not ask me to forgive him. That was the only reason I believed he had begun to change. He confessed to helping Soma steal research data and accepted his sentence without performance, without tears for the cameras, without blaming me. Before they took him away, he looked at the bond mark on my neck, then at Akihiro standing beside me with his hand resting lightly at my waist. "I thought he was cruel because he would not love me," Ritsu said quietly. "But he was only honest." I answered after a long pause. "Honesty feels cruel to people who live by lies." He nodded as if the words hurt, then bowed his head. Years later, after serving his sentence, Ritsu would choose to work at an Omega recovery center under strict supervision. Not redemption. Not yet. But a beginning. A year after Aurelia fell, Akihiro became head of Kuro's clan, and I completed the stabilizer my parents had died protecting. We held our bond ceremony in the greenhouse, beneath white camellias blooming against glass warmed by winter sun. There were no forced vows, no political bargaining, no alpha pride dressed as romance. Only his hand in mine and the steady pulse of our soul bond, quiet and certain beneath my skin. During the ceremony, Akihiro gave me a small black notebook. I opened it and saw page after page of dates beginning from the day we returned to this life. At the end, written in his precise handwriting, was a single line. "In the last life, I came too late. In this one, I wanted to love you from the very beginning." My eyes blurred before I could stop them. Akihiro wiped the tears away with his thumb, helplessly gentle. "Still too cruel?" he asked. I laughed and leaned into him. "Terribly. Then I will spend every life correcting it." Under the white camellias, my alpha kissed the mark he had given me, and I finally understood that we had not defeated fate by escaping pain. We had defeated it by choosing love without letting grief choose for us. Beyond the greenhouse, the new White Camellia Foundation opened its doors to orphaned Omegas, and children who once would have vanished into places like Aurelia now had names, guardians, and futures. Akihiro held my hand as we watched them run through the garden. "Next life," I said. "Will you find me again?" He lowered his head and kissed my temple, his cedar scent warm around our bond. "I will not need to search. Wherever you are, Run, my heart will already be on its way." In the end, Run and Akihiro proved that love was never something stolen by fate, blood, or jealousy. It was chosen, protected, and returned across lifetimes. Their bond became a promise no darkness could erase. Thank you for watching.